What is up, everybody? Nick here from P2W Fantasy here on a solo podcast. So I'm actually home today alone. It's been a wild week. So what happened this week was on Monday, I had to have surgery. So nothing crazy, kind of a minor one, but I did have to get knocked out for it. And, I have some pain meds and things like that and recovering okay. Just a lot of bruising. But that was day one on Monday. On Tuesday, had a massive playoff game for my varsity soccer guys, and we ended up playing the number two team in the state. And we scored a badass goal in this game, but one goal was not more than six, so we ended up losing that game. But we played a team that was just outstanding, just to be honest, and really proud of those guys. My first season with my old high school that I played at. So that was Tuesday. Wednesday, it was my birthday, 30th birthday. Just wild how like that's a thing. No more 20s for me. So people can make their old man jokes now, even though I basically have been one for a while just by my nightly bedtime and things like that, some of my antics. But yeah, 30th birthday on Wednesday, and then today another random oddball had an assistant coach of mine text me and say that he was COVID positive. I actually rode with him on a bus, not a bus, I'm sorry, in his car on the way to practice on Monday after my surgery. I couldn't drive, and he was nice enough to give me a ride, but I needed to schedule an appointment to get tested. I am double vaccinated, but want to make sure just because I'm supposed to have birthday plans and I don't want to risk anybody else getting infected. So I took a rapid one and at home one, and then I have a test later on today. So that's why I'm home. So I'm just working from home today. So I figured, hey, take a minute and get on a podcast, on a solo podcast. So hopefully I don't annoy you guys too much with just me talking the whole time. Usually it's me and Kevin, or me and another person. I'm actually going to be extending out some offers for guest spots now that soccer is done, but solo podcast at home, taking advantage of time, big proponent of that. So what we got going on today, talking trade targets, guys to add on to your teams. We're approaching week 7. Plenty of time to adjust your standings in the leagues you play in and really improve your season here. So that's what I'm here for. So as always, this podcast is sponsored by or partnered with the Fantasy Points Media Group. Honored to be a part of the Fantasy Points staff in general and do shows with them on Sundays. But check out fantasypoints.com. I'm on there every single day looking at advanced stats, red zone stats, all these different numbers. But you may like their articles. You may like their live streams. They literally have so many different things to offer. Whatever you're looking for is literally on this website. Go check it out. They already have a discount as is because the season's been going on. But use my promo code 21WIN10 for yet another discount. Well worth it. So if you're listening to this podcast, unfortunately can't see the comments. Still an issue, I guess, with StreamYard and Twitter, but stay tuned for a good show. Going to be a solo pod. I got a lot to say on this one. So thanks for tuning in.
Play to win, no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, play to win, I play to win.
So again, if you are tuning in, solo show while I'm at home today, working from home. This is my lunch break. But what I'm talking about today are some players to look to trade for, some players to maybe add in a trade package, or you might just be able to pick them up for free heading into week 7 or for the rest of the season with a redraft focus here. So going to share the full list here, and I'll get into each guy individually. I wanted to do the cool PowerPoint thing and do one at a time, but I don't have my monitor with me, so I don't be, I'm not as tech savvy at home with my limited resources here. But going player by player. And again, some guys you may be interested in, some guys you may have zero interest in. I know looking at some of the names on this list, you might say, hey, like this guy's gross, man. I have no interest at all in this guy. While on the flip side, you might be saying, hey, I've been starting to get a little bit more interested in this specific guy. Maybe I can convince you even further. So these are some suggestions, maybe just for this week, maybe for the rest of the season. We'll get into each guy. But the big thing is this is the massive, massive bye week right now. So we got 2, 4, 6 teams on buys. You got the Bills, Cowboys, Jaguars, Chargers, Vikings, and Steelers. So you might be at a massive need this week. You might really need a dub. I know I'm 1-5 in a home league, which destroys me because I went to the final last year in this home league. And it's interesting because first place is like, I don't know, 5-1. But second, third, fourth, in this division, we are like all 1-5. So I desperately need a win this week in a specific league. And I know that I'm missing a bunch of players because I do have some of these guys that are out this week. And there's also been a ton of injuries. So I think it's vital to start making moves. You don't have to just make moves out of, boredom or out of the field to do so. But if you're at that point where you really need 1 or 2 pieces to make yourself a true contender to win it all, or you have some catching up to do, be active. Don't just sit back and hope that things come to you. So first guy on this list, AJ Green, might be more of a deeper league suggestion, might be a desperation ad, but this is a guy that should be for free. He's only 37% rostered in ESPN leagues. They're playing the Texans, which you might say is not going to be a big shootout game, but I do think that this Cardinals offense is obviously very good, operated by a great quarterback in Kyler Murray, but every single week besides one this year, AJ Green has had 6 targets. He's been pretty productive with that. If you look at some of the fantasy points he's had through those games, 13.4, 16.2, 17.7, and 18.9. He's had 3 touchdowns in 6 games. And you might say, well, Christian Kirk pops up and Hopkins is the alpha in the system. But at the same time, if you are telling me that some of those point weeks, 16.2, 17.7, 18.9, would not be useful to you in the flex position, you're either not in a very deep league or you just must have stacked up in a dynasty league somewhere where you have some studs. I do have a team like that myself. But I think AJ Green's a decent play. So if you are really, really desperate this week and he's still floating out on waivers, he's seen enough targets, and I know the game script might not be in favor to air it out the entire show, but he's had a lot of flex-worthy weeks, so that's one to consider. Next guy on this list, huge Calvin Ridley fan, and you know what? A lot of people are frustrated with him. Wide receiver 48 right now. He was the wide receiver 22 weeks 1 through 4 because he did miss a game because of some sort of personal issue. I haven't really looked into what that was exactly, or what the reasoning is. At the end of the day, personal issue, none of my business, but he should be back now. They did have the bye, so even through the weeks he was healthy. Wide receiver 22 is not what we expected. I think I had him like wide receiver 3 or 4 going into this season, but he had one 19.3 game, but nothing else explosive. So we have yet to see the Calvin Ridley 30-point week or 25-point week or something along those lines there. But what is encouraging, of course, is the targets. He's had targets such as 8, 10, 11, and 13. Miami coming up this week gives up the 5th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position, according to ESPN. So I do think that Calvin Ridley is going to be a guy that can potentially still be a league winner. I know that the Falcons have been frustrating because we wanted, it to be the Calvin Ridley and the Kyle Pitts show, and it's been the Patterson show over there. But I do think a lot of people may be frustrated with Calvin Ridley's production so far this season. And sometimes, I'm not suggesting to take advantage of your league mates, but if you feel a certain way and it's the opposite of the current manager, then it's in your favor to make the move before somebody else does. So I would suggest on a team that has Calvin Ridley just to kind of feel out how they feel about this guy. Because for me, I still want him everywhere. And I know he's not producing the way we want him to yet, but targets don't lie. The involvement and the importance in the offense doesn't lie. I want Calvin Ridley, and I think that the price has taken a hit just because of frustrations, and emotions do come into play when it comes to fantasy football. Next guy on this list, Rashad Bateman, a guy you can probably pick up for free still in redraft. And again, most of what we're talking about here, if not everything, is redraft focused. Rashad Bateman, 15.7% rostered in ESPN league. So his first game back, he didn't play the entire year because of injuries, but his first game back, he had 4 catches on 6 targets. Not a ton of yardage, but he was very, very involved in this offense right away. And I think that's a great sign. What also is a really good sign is that Lamar Jackson looks like a good passer right now. I know a lot of people still are Lamar Jackson haters out there and, only see him as a rushing quarterback, but seeing him be more productive, more efficient with his passing. He had the 4 touchdown passing week. I like Rashad Bateman still. For most people, he was the somewhere between the wide receiver 2 and 3, I'd say, out of this rookie class from most fantasy analysts. So obviously we forget about certain players when they are not involved and they don't play. He's back, and seeing him get 6 targets day 1 for the Ravens is encouraging. So I think if you believe in the talent for him and you see the involvement right away, I think there's room for optimism. He might be a guy that you might have to throw into your flex position if you're missing a lot of guys this week. And seeing that they play the Bengals this week, I think that Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, the mix of those guys are going to try to challenge the Ravens, and the Ravens might have to resort to going through the air here. So I like Rashad Bateman. I think he's a good complement to Marquise Hollywood Brown. I think them two players are very different in what they bring to the table. So I have a lot of faith in Rashad Bateman. I think he's a great pickup. And even if you don't play him immediately this week, the fact that he's still floating on waivers right now, we've seen plenty of rookies in the past get highly involved in their offenses. And I think Rashad Bateman, week 1 that he was back, just showed you, hey, I am going to be a piece of this offense. I am going to have a role here. And I do like what Lamar Jackson's doing. Zach Moss, they're on a bye. So he could be an even easier pickup if you are interested in him. And I've seen a lot of 50-50s. I think him and Singletary kind of split a little bit here in the last game. He didn't score very high. So again, if you are in desperation mode for a running back, you are a manager that had several injuries this season, or you have some running backs that haven't been very productive, I think Zach Moss is a cheaper option to go after. 4 total touchdowns on the year. I think that's the big difference between him and Devin Singletary, is that Zach Moss actually scores. And the good thing about the Buffalo Bills is that they are actually in good scoring positions often because they're a great offense. That might be one of the best offenses in the league. You might say they're top 3, somewhere in that top 3. When the offense is good and he's getting the touches, I like that. I mean, he hasn't had, again, if we go and we say, well, Zach Moss, he hasn't had a 30-point week. He hasn't had a big week where he's the RB, a top 5 RB, but he's had a 15.4, 18.1, and then 2 weeks in the 12s right now. And again, cheaper running back options to target. I think he's a good one right now. Good offense and a player that's getting some touches. Early on, didn't look to be that way, but it progressively is looking to be that. Next guy, T. Higgins. T. Higgins to me is like that little brother who's that little brother who has the older sibling that is the all-star sports player. Let's say, you got an older brother who is a varsity captain football player, and then the younger brother is on the freshman team or the sophomore JV team, and he gets completely overshadowed by the all-star. And I think that's kind of what has happened to a degree with Jamar Chase being on the team. And Jamar Chase has been awesome. One of my biggest regrets is in a dynasty league. I kind of sold him for the low, trying to be a big win now team. I'm 6-0 in that specific league, but that was a massive whiff. But Jamar Chase has been great, and I think a lot of focus has been there. He missed 2 weeks, T. Higgins, and then he had a dud of a game. He's had some weeks where he's had 15.8 and 16 fantasy points. He started off that way. He actually had 10 targets in week 2. I think the big question mark is going to be, is it going to be a carousel of targets on where Joe Burrow's throwing the ball and if it's going to be spread out and things like that. But a lot of us really liked what T. Higgins did in his rookie season. I think T. Higgins has a great ceiling. I think that he's a guy that can go off for a 2-touchdown game, or he can score and have a lot of yardage in a particular game. And the Bengals defense is not going to keep them in tons and tons of games. So you know that Joe Burrow is going to be airing it out a ton. He looks good. Joe Burrow looks good. So T. Higgins being that wide receiver that's being overshadowed right now by the rookie, I think is a good trade target. And again, does the manager in your league feel that way? Does he feel that T. Higgins is still a guy that will produce? It kind of just depends. So I'm knocking on that door, though, because I think T. Higgins is a guy that can be a great wide receiver 3 on your team. For some people, he might end up being their wide receiver 2. Kind of just depends on the outlook of your team. But if you have 2 solidified wide receiver 2s and you are able to add T. Higgins, I think that is great for your wide receiver room. I threw Nick Chubb on this list because he's out. He's not going to play on Thursday. And, one thing that stands out to me is with even missing a week, he's the RB15. And a lot of people will say, and I see all of this chatter on Twitter all the time saying, Nick Chubb, he doesn't catch the ball enough, and Kareem Hunt gets too many touches. But what is amazing about this guy is that he's had 5 games of 83-plus rushing yards. He's had games of 100 rushing yards and 161 rushing yards. That's his last 2 games played. He is awesome, and he is one of the, if not the most important pieces of the Cleveland Browns offense. They don't operate through Baker being good. They operate through their running game being good. And I know Kareem Hunt gets tons of touches, but at the same time, Kareem Hunt is now on the IR. So let's say that Nick Chubb doesn't play tonight. Today's Thursday. But let's say he's back next week and he has 2 weeks without Kareem Hunt. That gives him maybe a slight bump in the passing game and more touches overall. So I'm going to actually pull up their schedule here. I'm kind of curious to see that. But if he's the solo man in the system for, let's say, 2 weeks, we'll count out this Thursday game. Let's say he's in there for Pittsburgh and Cincinnati by himself. I know the Steelers are a good defense, but still, just having no Kareem Hunt and having a lot of Nick Chubb, I think, is something that would be very, very intriguing. And again, Nick Chubb, are you going to get him for the low? Probably not, but at the same time, emotions coming into play. Like I said before, for fantasy football, he's not playing this week. He didn't play before, or he was hurt before. Nick Chubb's a guy I'm always going to be interested in, and I'm always against all these people saying that his ceiling is not as good as it should be because of the pass catching ability. This guy still goes off literally every single game in the run game, and he is a threat to score 1, 2, 3 touchdowns on a weekly basis. Next guy on the list, Jerry Judy. So this might be an add-on trade. So let's say you have a pretty close deal and the manager is still holding on to Jerry Judy. He's another guy that has frustrated everybody because he only played in week 1. And before the season started, he was one of the my guys that I talked about often in the preseason. I'm a massive Jerry Judy fan. And I still, and people can argue and debate, and I'm just not about it. I just have no interest in doing it. But fair enough if you think Courtland Sutton is the wide receiver 1 for the team. I think in a completely healthy world, that is not the case. I think it's Jerry Judy. Week 1, 6 catches for 72 yards on 7 total targets. He looked great. He looked great with Teddy Bridgewater in the preseason. Those two looked like they were connected very well. It might not be until like week 8 that this guy is actually playing fully. Even if it's not until week 9, 10, that to me says, hey, later down the road, if Jerry Judy is back to 100% health, and I believe I am a playoff team, he might be a guy that can give your team a true fantasy push. So believing in Jerry Judy, believing in the connection to Teddy Bridgewater, believing in the target share that he should have if he's 100% healthy, I think he's a guy I still want on my fantasy team. And he's sitting on IR. I think he's going to be coming off IR soon. Doesn't mean he's going to play. Maybe if you do acquire him, you don't play him right away. But I truly believe later in the season, when he's back to being himself, he's going to be very good in fantasy. And I was so disappointed after that injury because week 1, he looked great. He looked really, really good week 1. Next wide receiver on the list, Brandon Cooks. I saw this thing on Twitter, and it said something along the lines of, it had the stacked boxes, and it says like talent, and then next to it is recognition with a small box. So it's basically it was an engaging tweet that was asking who has a ton of talent but doesn't get enough recognition. And my clear-cut answer is Brandon Cooks. It was Brandon Cooks because, Brandon Cooks being a guy who's gone from team to team, situation to situation, quarterback to quarterback, he's always been good for fantasy. He had the one season with the concussions, but other than that, and I don't have the past seasons in front of me, but he's always been like a top 17 play, top 20 play for fantasy football, and he's rarely talked about. He started off the season super, super hot. Him and Tyrod Taylor look good together, and I know that the situation changed once Davis Mills came in, but early on the season, the first 3 games, 18.2, 22.8, 20.7. He went quiet for 2 weeks where he was under 10 fantasy points, but then again in week 6, 17.9. Love the targets for Brandon Cooks when he's getting involved to the highest level. We've seen targets such as 14, 11, and 13. So this is a guy who's had a lot of good fantasy weeks so far this season. He's the current wide receiver 17. But the thing is with Brandon Cooks, a lot of people still look at the Texans being a bad football team, which they are. A lot of people don't like the quarterback situation. And Brandon Cooks in general is just not talked about in the same fashion as a lot of other wide receivers. If you go, I'll pull up the list here. If you go and look at the current list of wide receivers and people that are kind of ranked around Brandon Cooks, Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton, Deontay Johnson, Amari Cooper's down the list. Keenan Allen's further down. Mike Evans is somewhere around there. Antonio Brown's around him. A lot of these guys, in my opinion, get talked about so much more than Brandon Cooks. And sure, they're in better situations and they have more stable environments, but I still want Brandon Cooks on all of my teams. The guy gets targeted a ton. He's on the field nonstop, and he produces good games. He's quarterback and situation proof. I stand by that. So Brandon Cooks, before he has another massive week, I think is a great trade target. Next on the list, Michael Pittman Jr. He had a slow game last week, but with a 31-3 score against the Texans, I don't think the Colts necessarily needed to be, this big offensive air-it-out threat in that game. T.Y. Hilton's back, and he had a nice week, but Paris Campbell on the flip side goes to the IR. Michael Pittman Jr.'s had 2 games of 12 targets. He had 8 and 7 in weeks after those back-to-back 12-target weeks. He's had 2 games above 20 fantasy points as well. The thing is with Pittman, it kind of goes along with Brandon Cooks. I like Cooks a lot better than Pittman personally, but I don't think Pittman is talked about nearly enough and nearly as much as other wide receivers in the league. And I think that the fact that, if you go to your home league chat and you throw in, Michael Pittman looked good today, I don't think a lot of people are going to necessarily like chime in and be like, yeah, this guy's been a dog all season. I think he's still kind of slightly under the radar. I'm not going to say that people don't know who he is. Looking at his involvement in games, he's had some nice fantasy games, but I still don't think that the recognition is to the highest degree that this guy is untouchable and fantasy managers shouldn't haul him off. So Michael Pittman Jr. after a slow week might be a good time now to go shoot an offer. People will notice that T.Y. Hilton was back in the mix, and that sometimes makes people question, what's this Pittman guy, this sophomore, what's his role going to be moving forward? So I still like him because I think the targets are good. I think he's important to the offense, and he's had some very nice weeks. I think he took a nice jump from his freshman to his sophomore year. Robert Woods I threw on the list. Might be more of a I'm in a bad situation sort of play that I need a wide receiver. He, to me, is a wide receiver 3 right now for fantasy. He's a guy that you can throw into your flex. It just really depends on the price for Robert Woods in your leagues. And it's going to be different league to league because if I personally have Robert Woods, I'm not going to sell him for pennies. But I've also been in leagues where he was sold for pennies. So it kind of just depends because, before the season started, we thought that it'd be a 1A, 1B between him and Cooper Kupp. I'm guilty of saying it was a Robert Woods above Cooper Kupp situation. Not the case. Cooper Kupp has really made me eat my words there, but he's still a big piece of this offense. The Rams offense looks like a team that might be a Super Bowl contender this year. They might be the Super Bowl winning team at the end of the year. The Rams look really good, and he's still going to be a big piece of this offense. The issue is going to be week to week. What are the targets looking like? We've seen some weeks where Woods has had like 2 targets, and then we've seen the week 2 weeks ago where he had 14 targets and he had 27 fantasy points. So he's a guy that he can have a big ceiling because of Matthew Stafford, and if he gets the target share in a particular game, but maybe he's an add-on player to a bigger trade. Maybe you have a big trade going down and you are one piece away from making it a thing, and then you ask for Robert Woods. It kind of just depends on your league. But again, good offense. We've seen very, very good games for him out of his career. He's got a good quarterback. I know he's been frustrating, but he hasn't been a guy that we need to write off completely or drop like the fantasy community sometimes says a little too often. Next on the list, Darren Waller. So this is an interesting one to talk about because when it comes to a guy like Darren Waller, I think a lot of people are simply frustrated with him not being the Darren Waller we expected. I think a lot of people expect on a weekly basis what he did in week 1. Week 1, 19 targets, right? 26.5 fantasy points. And then after that, he's been all right. I mean, he's a tight end 4, but he hasn't been winning you weeks necessarily. So what I like about Darren Waller, obviously, is the fact that he is a massive talent. He's a massive athlete. I think he's extremely important still to the Raiders offense. It hasn't been exactly what you wanted, but I think it can be what you wanted. So I think there's better weeks to come is what I'm saying. So right now, if you look at some guys that are doing well for fantasy, the names of or the likes of Dalton Schultz, Dawson Knox, Noah Fant, Mike Gesicki, those guys come to mind. And those guys have been good recently in games. And you might argue that rest of the season, those are good plays. I would argue that you can use one of those guys plus something to go get Darren Waller still. And you might not be super in love with the production, but at the end of the day, he still has the ability to go off for a game where he catches 8 balls and scores a touchdown or 2 and then really wins you a week. So for me, Dalton Schultz, Dawson Knox, Noah Fant, Mike Gesicki, I'm saying those names again. Those are guys who've been good lately. I would take one of those guys, add another decent piece. Maybe the other manager really needs a wide receiver and you're pretty deep in that position. And I would go get Darren Waller. And I really think that the price has changed for him. Unless somebody is like me and is completely stuck in the mud with their stance on him. But Darren Waller just been a little bit frustrating just because he doesn't win you those weeks. But I think he's a nice target there. Go down to Sterling Shepard. I think Sterling Shepard's cheap. I think he's cheap, but I think he's extremely important to the New York Giants. Kadarius Toney is out, I believe, again with this ankle issue. Kenny Golladay might be the most frustrating player in all of fantasy just because he himself is out yet again, and we don't know if he's going to be back, if he's going to play. If he does play, what's his involvement going to be like? But Sterling Shepard's been great this year in games healthy. 19 targets the first 2 games, 14 targets in his last game. He's had fantasy weeks where he has scored 24.3, 17.5, 17.6. So Sterling Shepard has been a great fantasy asset when healthy. He is a target monster, and I think he is a great add for your team. He's not going to be your wide receiver 1, shouldn't be your second best wide receiver on your team. But again, I don't think that the price is massive unless the current manager really, really needs Sterling Shepard. I actually looked in a league today that I'm struggling in a little bit and saw that Sterling Shepard was a flex play for this manager, and last week he got benched by this manager. I did some detective work on it. So I sent an offer today. I sent 2 wide receivers for 1. Both wide receivers are fine plays that he might bite on. And I actually would be pretty happy about it because in a situation with the Giants where a lot of guys are banged up, if Sterling Shepard is healthy, he's a good play. He's a great flex play in my opinion here. Michael Carter, threw him on the list too. The role continues to increase, and it's not pretty because it's the Jets and they don't look great. But he had his best game last week, week 5, 14.8 fantasy points. I think if you are a team, again, that is running back desperate, I think he's a guy that is not super expensive that you can look to add. What we want to see continue to happen is what happened last game, 3 catches. So if this guy can get 3 to 5 catches and then get enough touches to get some yardage, I think he can be another guy that could be a flex play, or he could be a good bye week fill-in, because I know a lot of us, when we are drafting teams for redraft, personally, I'm guilty of it. I'm not looking at bye weeks and making sure that, hey, if I pick this guy, he doesn't have the same bye week as my other running back or my third running back. I'm guilty of it. I usually just draft the best players available, guys that I actually want. And, sometimes you get bit with that with bye weeks or injuries. So Michael Carter, easy target if you're looking for a kind of buy low guy there. Next guy on the list here, Devonta Smith, the rookie, the former Heisman Trophy winner. So frustrating part, 3 games under 6 fantasy points. So people might be questioning, can they trust playing Devonta Smith on a weekly basis in this Eagles offense? He's still the team's alpha wide receiver, and I think he has a good connection with Jalen Hurts. Is he going to have these weeks where he doesn't have a great fantasy game? Sure, but that goes for most wide receivers in the league. Weeks 4 and 5, he caught 7 passes in both of those games. Here's his targets in some games. Good targets. 8, 7, 6, 10, 9. So the targets are definitely there. He's had 19-ish fantasy points twice now. I think you should buy the dip, because I think, again, he had a frustrating week. I don't think that he is to the same price level by any means as a guy like Jamar Chase, another rookie, or some other wide receivers who have been a bit more consistent. I think there's questions about the Eagles offense. I think there's still questions about Jalen Hurts as a passer by some people. I'm all for trying to get Devonta Smith on my fantasy team. Again, sometimes just buy the dip and go by the targets. I think that's a good way to go about things sometimes. Always butcher the name, but we'll call him Big Pat. But Pat Freiermuth, rookie tight end for the Steelers. He's on a bye, but he's only 3% rostered right now, which means that if you have the ability to go and stash him on your fantasy team, I might do so, especially if your tight end is a top 5 guy who has not had a bye week yet. Big Pat might be a good fill-in, because, looking at the Juju injury, Deontay Johnson, Najee Harris, we know that those guys are clear-cut going to have good volume, but Pat had 7 targets in that game without Juju, and he caught every single one of them. So how do you gain the coaching staff's trust? How do you gain your quarterback's trust? You catch all your targets. He's outsnapped Ebron 5 out of 6 weeks played so far as well. So Big Pat, again, on a bye week, if you have the ability to stash him, he might be a good grab just because of the opportunity in the offense. If he continues to have targets, I think the Steelers find ways to get people in the end zone at times too. He might just be that guy for your Travis Kelce, your Mark Andrews, your Darren Waller. You go down the list, your injured tight end for their specific bye week to plug in. 3 more guys on the list. Leonard Fournette has been absolutely awesome. I called him what other people have called him, a Lombardi Fournette on the show at Kevin. I don't think Kevin was a massive fan of that, but he has been awesome. Great team, great opportunities, great offense. Just simple as that with the Buccaneers. Rojo, I think I was a year late on my take that Fournette was greater than Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones was better last year through the fantasy season, but he lost his job through both injury and Leonard Fournette playing good in the playoffs. And now this year, Leonard Fournette is the RB1. It's not a timeshare. It's not a running back by committee. Leonard Fournette is the RB1. RB2 this past week with 30.7 fantasy points. If we look at his streak right now, so weeks 4, 5, and 6, he is the RB4 overall across that stretch. He just caught 6 passes in this last game. I think that is a massive sign as well. If Leonard Fournette continues to be a workhorse, if he continues to find the end zone, if he continues to get involved in the passing game, he's a league winner. And I don't think that he has the same price tag as a Dalvin Cook or a Jonathan Taylor or anything like that. So when a guy is producing as a top 5 running back and he doesn't have the name value or the trade value as some other guys that are right up there, I'm shooting some offers for him. I think after this podcast, I really am going to try, just because he's been great. He's been great, and the opportunities are going to continue to be there. I don't think the Buccaneers will be in many games this season either that they are going to be playing from behind and all they do is pass the ball. I think they should be winning most of their games. They're one of the best, if not the best, team in the NFL still. And I think that the game scripts are going to be important for him just to keep going. A.J. Brown, touch briefly on him. Again, it kind of just depends on the manager in your league. He's averaging 9.1 fantasy points. It's been a struggle of a year. A lot of people are skeptical right now on Tannehill to a degree, on the Titans' offense, on A.J. Brown's health. But last game, he went for 7 catches for 91 yards on 9 targets, 16.1 fantasy points. I think that is what we expect out of A.J. Brown, but to a little bit more of an expectation. So 16.1 is good. I think we want A.J. Brown to be scoring like 20 points, but a lot of people have been very, very frustrated with him. So he's had 8 or 9 targets in 3 out of 5 games appeared in this season. If you believe in the talent, I think he's a guy to buy the dip on. I think he's going to have a good target share. Julio Jones can't stay healthy. I was a fool for, going and getting Julio in a league before the season started. But A.J. Brown, very frustrating to managers. And when guys frustrate managers, I'll say it for the 3rd time now on the podcast, fantasy managers play with emotions at times. And sometimes you can kind of capitalize on that when, the guy that they expected to be an all-star has been an average player at best. So A.J. Brown, believe in the talent. I believe in the target share. I believe in the big games to come. He's a guy, if you can buy for a slight discount, I'm going after that. Last guy on the list here before we wrap things up. I've been talking for almost 40 minutes, so the words are starting to get a little bit jumbled here. Kind of tired of my own voice at this point, but Ricky Seals-Jones. So this is not a trade target. This is a guy you might be able to add for free. 41.7% rostered across ESPN leagues. Just keep an eye on the quad injury because that popped up on the report. What that'll mean for this coming week. Sometimes it'll mean nothing. Sometimes it'll mean something. Just keep an eye on whatever reports come out. But 15 targets across the last 2 games. And for me, the number one thing for a tight end when I don't have an elite tight end is targets. So a guy that I am always looking for when it comes to drafting or trading for or picking up on waivers is a tight end that gets a good target share. So 15 targets across the last 2 games, filling in for an injured Logan Thomas is good. He's had 99 yards in those 2 games combined as well, and he's scored in those 2 games. So I think that the signs point to the right direction. It's the Terry McLaurin and maybe Ricky Seals-Jones show. I don't know. There's not a clear-cut wide receiver 2 right now on this team with guys being banged up and no consistency there. So I think Ricky Seals-Jones, he's been on the field a ton. The yardage has been good. The targets have been good. If you have an injured tight end, if your tight end is on a bye, again, we had all those teams on byes that we showed at the beginning, Bills, Cowboys, Jags, Chargers, Vikings, Steelers. If your tight end is out of the mix this week or you're just looking for an improvement, I think that he's a good play. He's a good play. If you go to your waiver wire right now and you look at who's available and he is a guy that's available, he'll be the highest projected player. So, again, not a trade target, but a guy that if you can get for free, I think could be worth it in these weeks moving forward until Logan Thomas is back to health. So, again, midday stream, working from home today, lunch break here. If you guys listen to this podcast, really, really appreciate it. I think that I might be coming out with something else this week before the Sunday show with fantasy points. But again, any listens live here, watching on YouTube, if you listen on the iTunes or Spotify or anything there, always appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe, man. It really means a lot to me when people tune in and give some positive feedback or say, hey, I enjoyed this or that. But again, full list of guys here, some trade targets, some freebies. Kind of depends on what you are looking for. But again, if you were on the fence about any of these guys before, maybe I convinced you. If you have no interest in some of these guys, you just kind of move forward and hear out the next guy. That's why I provide a lot of options here. When it comes to things like DFS and advice on people to drop or guys that might bust, I think that needs to be more specific. But sometimes when it comes to picking up players or training for players, I think that having a larger list can be more beneficial and have the actual manager yourself kind of wait out and hear and see the reasoning behind adding some of these guys and how it will benefit your fantasy team. So good luck in week 7, guys. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate y'all.